Hello everyone and welcome back. In this MMO roundtable discussion, we're going to begin discussing environments. Now, as I said in the introductory video to the MMO roundtable video concept, some videos may be longer than others. We just want to get general ideas down, and some of these ideas, the generalization's pretty big, and sometimes it's not as big. And I'm saying that only because I have no idea how big this section's going to be because it was really just tossed out a couple of hours ago by Nelson.
Well, I think that about wraps it up then.
Well, thank you guys very much. It's been really nice, and we'll move right on. So environments. There's been a lot of talk in the forums and between us as well about space and planetary. I mean, are we going to have space travel? If so, why? What? For what? For where can we go? And planetary, well, as Zach had said once upon a time, that really just breaks down to do we want to have air, land, and sea? And I hope we have air because breathing is important.
You know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. So, want to start jotting some stuff down? Do you want to? I mean, do we want to just start out with space?
Well, you know, you could divide it into two general areas. There's outer space, and then there's, well, inner space. There's planet side.
Yes, planet side.
Now, planet side itself could divide up into really simple stuff. I mean, you could have land, sea, and potentially air, even though that's kind of weird. Because, I mean, you still got to be standing on something, but it's like, you know, do you want to have some Bespin Cloud City-like thing, you know, like something that just kind of floats or
like
floating
Dalaran
islands?
in World of Warcraft.
Yeah, or the big floating rocks in Avatar, you know, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Though technically, you could probably easily argue that that's just a land environment. It's just been elevated a bit, and I would understand that, which is why there's still a question mark resting.
But I wouldn't have a problem personally arguing it going into land. I mean, excuse me, into air, saying that you've got to have some sort of transportation to get up there to it.
Sure.
So, but
yeah, I just mean like in and of itself,
Yes.
it's still land travel because you're having to walk around on something.
sure.
But anyway,
So, Lee, where do we want to start out at? And talk about space. I mean, we're now getting into
I
your.
say we start
world.
off with space and then work our way
Down.
further and further down. Yeah.
Okay.
So the big one
do you
being
even want to have
space.
space?
Fact,
Well-
space does not exist.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Nelson.
Sorry. I had to. I really had to. That was perfect time.
Well, if it was to exist,
Yeah, assuming that space exists.
what would we want to do with it?
Fill it with stuff.
Fill it with stuff. What kind of stuff are you interested in filling it
That's
with?
problematic, being that space is a vacuum.
Well, if we fill it with stuff, then it's no longer a vacuum.
Meaning it's no longer space.
Well, space doesn't exist to begin with, right?
I'm so confused. Let's
Okay.
get back on topic.
On topic. So,
All right. Well, I mean, how extensive is our space going to be? Are we looking at, do we just want to have maybe some orbital stations around Alethea? And then the limit of space travel is going to be shuttling back and forth to the planet's surface? Is there going to be the possibility of traveling within the planetary system, or out to the extents of the solar system, or even possibly interstellar travel back to old Earth?
Well, I don't want to turn this into a travel discussion, but
they're going to cross over.
but they're going to cross over. I realize there's going to be some cross pollination there. For simplicity's sake, I would say that outside of the planet Alethea, we essentially just have stations and or ships that you could explore. These ships could be in orbit, or they could be on one of the neighboring moons.
Isn't Alethea a moon?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is. A
So
sub-moon.
what's it a moon of?
What is the Nyala, I believe.
Mhm.
Great big purple gas giant.
Oh, so you probably can't travel there. I mean, maybe you couldn't travel to space stations there on like science quests or something.
Sure, I mean, and you could have like the Bespin style cloud city that's, you know, just underneath the surface of the atmosphere. I don't know. Yeah. Probably all
That was
kinds
the
of ways.
point.
you could-
Still, then the gravity would probably destroy you.
unless you've got an anti-gravity. I don't know. I'm just saying. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be cool if there was some way you could go to a station that orbited it, but it's not another planet that could be explored by walking around on it.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're not talking about in the first even few iterations of the game coming to life, necessarily even having space. But I find it interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, here's my question. And it really, to me, it just boils down to a simple decision. Is space active or passive? And what I mean by that is it something that the players can actively explore and journey through? Or is it just a means to an end? Meaning that, okay, so there's a space station, and maybe there's a loading screen or some sort of little in-flight movie, so to speak, to let you know that you're actually going through space. But in terms of gameplay, unless you can actually fly through it, space means nothing.
Right.
It's just a doorway into some other area.
I do like the thought of, and so let's just have fun with the discussion for a moment. We could leverage something that we will have at our disposal, and that is this terrain generation system that Lee is putting together. It would be very easy for us to, now this gets away from the planet thought, or gets back to multiple planets.
Yeah.
But let's say that we wanted to put multiple planets in this system. Those planets could have their terrain completely generated with Lee's system and could have the whole thing procedural. And the creatures, things that are running around on it, if we came up with a different set of species that would be, on that to give it this alien feel,
right?
You wouldn't have to have an artist go in there and do a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But you could say, if we wanted to say there's 5 other planets that you could travel to, what I'm getting at is we could make those worlds in a weekend without cities and all, but you could go there.
Well,
and adventure and explore. Now, if we had materials, more complex, advanced materials that you could only get from mining in space or going to another planet to get it, somebody who managed to actually get to another planet and bringing that back, that's something very valuable to sell in their store or on the market, etc.
I would at least maybe for the first iteration, keep it really simple. Even in our story, we were all excited when we found Alethea because humans could live here.
Sure.
So you start off with maybe just the moon, and that could just be completely procedurally generated. And you basically fill it full of minerals. It doesn't even necessarily have to have anything on it.
And you're saying the moon, Alethea, or
Kamalia, the little moon of
the other moon. Okay,
the one that actually orbits Alethea, or orbits neighboring to it.
Yes.
Anyway, I have to go back and check all my star charts, but. What was I even getting at? Yeah, I think if it was kept simple, it'd be an interesting way to go about it.
But Lee, you do agree with what I'm saying that technically we could come up with something as complex as stellar travel. Because the system.
Yeah, you're talking about interplanetary travel within the system, which isn't too bad. The world procedurally generated. You're talking about nothing much more complicated than the worlds that you got in the original Mass Effect when you went down to the planet's surface. Most of those, if I remember, except for a couple ones that had story arcs on them, they were just barren terrain. There wasn't even any foliage on any of them.
No, they weren't. And they were pretty dull.
Yeah, so even this procedural system would at least
be a leap
put
ahead.
Some trees on it.
Well, we could come up with our own alien-like tree. The whole environment could look alien-like.
Each planet would have its own unique look, as long as we're keeping it down to just Kamalia and a handful of planets.
Right.
Then we're not getting crazy with, something the scale of Eve with every planet able to be landed on. But that's what I was wondering is if we were to look at the possibility of space, how extensive would you want it to be all the way out to something like Eve scale, which would be a bit excessive? or something smaller within the solar system of Alethea itself.
Yeah,
just
but
to give
I think
some
that question
variety.
becomes irrelevant until you've answered this one.
Well, let's get
Right.
Nelson's input real quick because he's got something he wants to say. Nelson?
Well, I think you have to look at the. I think for a early iteration of space travel, having a single moon that people can go and set up mining operations and do things to get resources, and they actually go there for a purpose would be great. But the issue when you start having a bunch of these worlds is being able to populate them with interesting content, and there's not enough. I mean, to be able to populate a single world with enough interesting content is a challenge. I think that I kind of like Jason's original idea about only early on opening up, one of these moons and not trying to go full blown, because at that point it becomes the Mass Effect situation where everything's pretty dull. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I would love the idea for a system or a game to be as large as the current universe with enough interesting content to explore for 2 billion lifetimes over. But that's doubtful that's going to happen. However, I still don't want to get away from the idea of space travel in its entirety, because I think setting up mining operations on moons is a really interesting idea.
And, well, like I said, I agree. If we keep it smaller, we can keep it more focused and more interesting. There's just no way to, in any timely fashion, be able to populate an entire universe and keep it. Not to mention the fact that if we did offer not only a huge world on Alethea and a really large world on Kamalia, and then other planets on top of themselves and other star systems with other planets and other moons, we'd never run into any other person ever. So you end up with that problem. But then, so even if we were to say, okay, the extent of space travel is going to be within Alethea's solar system, with the possibility of maybe wormhole travel or some sort of travel back to the old Earth, maybe, possibly, at some point. Then inside of Alethea, where you can travel in space, are we going to allow the player to have spaceships and navigate on their own? If they do, are we going to look at the possibility of space combat? Or is it going to be all story-driven, where you basically purchase your ticket up to a station, and from that station you hit some shuttle to another planet, and then after a series of cutscenes that you have the option to jump out of, you end up on at a terminal on the other planet.
The question.
Still there?
Yeah, I am, Nelson.
I didn't mean to interrupt Zach.
No, go ahead, please.
The question is how could because the idea of being able to fly your own spaceship, I mean, that's really cool. I like that idea. The issue is what benefit would that be to your player, and being able to get in a spaceship and fly around for a little while isn't probably worth the development effort unless there's something that you could put in that's actually interesting to do, which would be combat. But
and then asteroid mining and all this other stuff that you usually see in a space-type game.
Right, but the issue I see with that is the scale, and that's an interesting point you brought up a second ago, is you get to the point where you'll no longer run into anybody. And to be able to accurately represent space, the distance between planetary bodies is stupid. I mean, I don't think we appreciate that on Earth, when we could, walk from one side of the United States to the other. And
I mean, surely there's some way that Eve pulls it off to where there's still combat and things to do, and you don't ever see.
Well, you
anything.
get hot points. Basically, you get a list of points inside of a solar system, and you jump to those points.
Yeah, that would be the only way you could do it. What I was getting at earlier is, unless you can actually get a spaceship and actively fly it through space, then space isn't even an environment. Space at that point is just a concept to help you get to one of these other locations, such as another planet or a space station or what have you.
And starting out, I don't see that as an issue to me. I mean, does anybody else disagree?
Right. No, well, again, everything that we're going over is not something that I would expect to see available at the very beginning. But I'm still going over.
But would it be a goal at some point?
I still like the idea of leveraging what's already going to be completed as far as a very powerful tool to simply say, here's our world, boom. And it's not something that artists have to go into. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, but I mean, I know you're interested in looking into procedurally generated towns, cities, etc. Even if you wanted to populate something with just procedural stuff, something that was not.
No, if I can pull off everything I hope to with the terrain generation system, our only limitations are going to be the amount of storage space that we have and the assets that artists are able to come up with that are unique for each of the different worlds.
Correct. Because
we end up with sets that go together for each planet that would give different planets a unique look. If we kept with like the M-class planet, N-class planet, that type of motif, where each one only had 2 or 3 different sets of trees and grass and stuff, because there's no way that every planet could possibly have its own set of assets, then we could, with some extent, mix and match between the different ones for different classes of planets. Technically, you could build a universe the size of Eve if you had enough storage and procedurally generate every single one of those planets with this system.
But now
so that wouldn't be an issue.
But if we back up, I mean, Nelson, if you're going to jump back on the size now, I already know. But even if we did a few systems later on, not systems, but a few planets within a system later in time, where it's nothing more than quests to go to, where you end up with having to get some weird creature name you've never heard of before. So now you have to research what the heck this is. And then you find that this is something that's only been spotted on this one particular planet. Now you got to figure out how you're going to get to this planet. And then there you could track it down and kill it, whatever, and bring it back. I mean, you could start to make it to where people have to explore other areas. I'm just, without spending years of development time. Again, I'm looking at using a system that is being built now.
And the way you do it is you kind of cheat the system. You give the solar system, if we did it that way, would have a list of planets. And when you brought up your drive system, it would show you all the planets, all the stations, the different asteroid belts, the moons, and you could pick your destination from there, so you don't have to handle the navigation between these large distances between the planets. You would spin up a little warp type animation, and the next thing you know, you're orbiting that planet, or you're in that asteroid field.
It's like Mass Effect 1 or 2. I've just played a lot more of 2 lately. Mass Effect 2 only takes place either on a space station, on a planet, or in your ship. That is it. Now, the whole time, conceptually, you're flying all throughout the galaxy, you're exploring all these other planets, you're dropping probes down, and you're mining and doing all this other stuff. That part is just a mini-game, where you're just controlling a little icon of your ship flying around on a map. The actual gameplay, in terms of you've got a character running around, you're either on your ship, or you're on a station or a planet. And that's it. And that's what I was getting at here.
Yeah.
I think I've beaten the dead horse in the ground, but I don't know if we ever actually decided if we wanted to actually fly around and experience space in a first-handed way. If we do, if we do, then space is an environment.
Yeah. I would love to get to the point where space was an environment and you were given a spaceship, but you could fly around and actually have some space combat, but the jumps between the different areas would be controlled, where your little ships don't have the capacity to slow fly between planet A and planet B, so you have to warp to it.
Like the idea of you have a short range ship that you can fly around, but you need to load it up onto a great big carrier of some sort to get you from one system to the next.
So then the way we could start this out is it starts out being passive, where you end up having to take a shuttle from one of the major cities up to one of the space stations,
right.
And then from the station take a shuttle over to Kamalia, and then even then with artists, we could just do one or two little cities that's on that planet, give it a completely different feel,
Yeah.
and then they could go and collect or mine or whatever they need there, and we could start with that.
Right.
Or settle.
And then you can
Or
open
settle,
it up.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I love the idea that you could settle and build your own little house or whatever,
Which, by the way, just to
habitat.
throw in there, absolutely, I do too. If we ever did get to a point where there were other planets in the system that you could actually go to,
Yeah.
that you don't have to register with anybody. You just stake your land, and anybody can come in and kick your butt as well and
Sure.
take your land.
because it's outside the jurisdiction.
That's
But
right.
see, then you're slowly opening it up. But even then, when you open it up to multiple planets and the moons and stuff, because we're still controlling the jumping between the large bodies, we still tighten up the overall space. So you're going to be more densely concentrating the populations of people around these planets or this asteroid or
Sure.
this station.
But
Which- Go ahead.
my issue with space as being active is simply that of what would you do? What would there be to do for the player? And would giving space the proper representation as being very large, would that make it impossible for you to ever run into another player? Because in reality, you go out to space, the likelihood of you running into another person in space is incredibly small.
That's why
Well,
I was
would it-
saying if you make the hot areas where you're jumping around a planet or a station, every player is going to be around that station or around one of the 4 or 5 planets that you have.
Yeah,
you're-
or
Go ahead.
or,
go ahead,
they're going to be around the asteroids mining, and that's where I would expect you'd find a lot of people, because in the asteroids you could have a special mineral that's only available there.
And as long
and
as,
then you got piracy.
but as long as, I mean, if you could go anywhere, to answer your question, Nelson, as long as you hadn't gone off grid, you could. Everybody would be registered with whatever that you get a feed from in your ship, where you could see where everyone was at. Basically, it's like with the FAA right now, with all of the commercial flights. There's apps you can get for your phone and use on the computer and see where every airplane is in the sky right now. Same kind of idea. And that's what I mean by if you went off grid, like you were a pirate or something. Now nobody could necessarily find you, though that person could be watching where everyone else is. And that does make the whole world, no matter how big it is, a whole lot smaller when you do know where everyone's at.
Okay, but it's still though. I don't see what you would do. That's my issue.
Right.
And
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah, I'm not either, and it's one
That's
of those
why
things
Lee
where
was simplifying it with if you just use.
yeah, stick with it
Right,
being
and-
passive at first, and then later on maybe develop the ability to explore it only insofar as you could find a reason for it, like in the Jump to Lightspeed expansion on in Star Wars Galaxies. And you do remember Star Wars Galaxies, don't you, Nelson?
Do you?
Sorry, I had to. The whole idea there was they opened it up specifically for space combat. You could do that if you could find a nice, meaningful way to handle space combat. It could be first person, like you are kind of playing X-wing, but multiplayer. It could be more like Battlestar Galactica Online, which actually, as much as I'm not really the world's biggest fan of that game, they did manage to put an MMO style feel to space fighter combat.
Do you feel fun?
Fun is an interesting way to put it. I mean, I wasn't the world's biggest fan, but I can see its merit.
Gotcha.
I wasn't like, oh my, because you know me in space though.
Yeah.
I think it works very well for what it
For
does.
MMO style.
Am I a big fan of what it does? No, only
Okay.
because I want my Thrustmaster joystick and my cockpit view.
Right.
But I mean that could be done, and so the space combat thing has its own allure. Outside of that, you've got exploration and resource gathering that could take place. And if you set it up in another way, you could have 3-dimensional areas of space that could be purchased by someone so that they could establish their own station. And then these could all be actually traversed in between, not automatically, because maybe you don't want your particular station or whatever to be listed. People could fly around to their other stations that people have built, and then you get the exact same arguments we had over property and terrain, all taking place in 3 dimensions in outer space.
I guess I don't know, and I've told you this before, but I really like space games, and like X3 and Freelancer.
I
and
do
so on.
too.
And one of the things I like about them is the concept of vastness, and especially in X3, being able to, build all your stations and stuff. And in the case of Freelancer, being able to establish trade routes and all that stuff. The thing is we're kind of building all those concepts into what you experience on the planet's surface.
Right.
So I guess sort of what the only thing, because I do love space, and if we had an infinite amount of time and resources, it would be cool to integrate that. The issue that I'm seeing is if we're already building all the things that I love about space and other space games onto the planet's surface, what other things can we put there?
Well, the only reason that I would even worry about having space as an active explorable thing is if the area of space you could explore was not particularly vast, meaning that it would be in a relatively, a big orbit, but it would still just be the local orbit of the planet is what you can explore.
Do you have any idea how big that is?
I know, but in terms of the galactic sense, it's actually quite tiny.
Yep, sure.
And then what you could do is catch, a carrier or something over to another planetary system where you have another block of space you could explore. And this central area could be anything. It could be a planet. It could be part of an asteroid belt which is passing through this. Anything.
And I continue to jump back to we're already going to have a system on the technical front that can generate any sort of ground surface that we want.
Right.
To make it look alien, populate it full of creatures, etc. So we can easily set up missions and requirements. Or, again, people could go out to a particular area just to gather something because no one else has it and sell it. I mean, that part's easy.
The idea of multiple planets it interests me as long as you don't, I guess you could say, overdo it. As long as the ratio of additional planets to explore is somehow proportional to the amount of players that are currently in the game world.
Sure.
And I really do like that idea. It's just the whole space is an active thing. That's what I was kind of talking about.
Yeah. You'd want to have something that you could do out there to make it worthwhile. Because if you don't, it's only going to be cool for about the first 3 minutes.
Right.
Space.
But not
I'm in space.
That's
the
right.
end.
Too much space. Tired of space.
Exactly.
Want to go home.
Earth, when I go to Earth. But yeah.
Okay.
Forgot what you're going to write, Zach.
Yeah. Well,
if we just start out with the one moon and a space station.
free side. Anyway. Then we'd get sued. So, yeah. So I think we've got that pretty much ironed out. Basically, I think what we've decided on, at least for now, is that space will be a passive thing. At least for starting out.
Yeah.
It'll just be a means to an end. We'll know that space is there because we are able to get to other environments that conceptually we had to pass through space in order to explore. But the players themselves won't be going through the vacuum and exploring that in 3 dimensions on their own. Correct?
If there was some way that we could, and Nelson, this goes back to something that you and I both love, and that's exploration. There's just some way to make it really advantageous in some way to a player who's exploring terrain off the beaten path because the world's so big, right? If there's, other than fighting stuff that's obviously going to be there because we can easily populate that just with our density map of creatures and types, etc. But if there's just something that they could do in even if it was photos or I don't know, something that somehow made it to where some people would want to go and explore on this planet.
Well, you always got the achievements, the ability to claim something.
Leonard said salvage. Of course, mining or some sort of resource gathering is a big one.
Or piracy, if you want to make those places outside of like kind of what you touched upon earlier. If you want to make the places outside of that main universe area thing lawless, then you can go ahead and have people who are unprotected, convoys that are unprotected, sending resources back to the main world. And those resources could be sent either from players or NPCs, and you could go in and you can pirate.
Kamali is the prison colony. That's where everybody gets thrown after they get thrown off of Lethia.
So we should be able to work this into the Another, hang on, what's the name of the movie?
Chronicles of Riddick.
Thank you, Chronicles of Riddick. There we go.
Or Alien 3.
Or Alien 3, yeah.
Just a nice big penal colony planet.
Okay, so starting out is, even though some people watching this video might think we're absolutely insane, I don't think we're looking at something very complicated to pull it off just so we can get out to a space station and get over to Kamalia.
Well, okay, no, because Kamalia, if it's just a moon, can almost be it will be completely generated by Lee's fantastic algorithm.
Absolutely.
No problem there. And the space station, it's just a big building.
It's a whole level of its own.
Yeah, you look out the window and you happen to see a planet instead of just the
God,
sky.
at the fun we can have with Easter eggs, though.
Yeah. But if you look at it that way, then this is really nothing all that crazy.
It doesn't stress me out at all.
Solving one planet is the hard part.
Yeah.
Every planet after that is just a matter of how many people you've got generating assets.
But I really do like the idea of exploration. I really do love that idea. But I guess the only resistance that you might be hearing from me is that I kind of want to explore how we could do that on the planet and get that ironed out before we start talking about it.
And I agree. And get it ironed out in such a way that now applies to any planet we want to introduce into the system.
But the point of this discussion is, what would we be interested in possibly entertaining as an idea to go with? Not saying that, hey, we're going to do this, this is it, this is going into our design document, we're going to have this day one.
Okay, so at this point, we're 31 minutes in, as Zach just pointed out. Let's go ahead and bring this discussion about the space element to a close. And we'll go ahead and continue with environments in the next video. And with that one, we'll begin discussing the land stuff, on the planet. So that'll wrap this up. We'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks a lot.